Good morning, Tampa. So, to piggyback on what Adam said, we immediately bonded. It was one of those things, hopped out of the car. He has that look of, I can't tell if it's the spirit or psychosis or a little bit of both. And I'm like, I immediately connect to that, right? So we're just, and so I'm like, I love this dude right off the bat. So I'm like, I can't say, do the token joke of the guy that comes and picks me up. That drives me nuts. Until we literally leave here, squirrels, I'm sure there's a big blinking light on his dash that says, your keys are at the hotel. And we get, probably, he says 2 miles. I'm pretty sure it's about 5 miles down the road. He gets out of the car, and I see him looking over there, and I go, you lock your keys in the car? He goes, I think they're back at the hotel. So the valet, this guy's so important, the valet drives the keys over to us, right? And I'm like, God just gives me this joke that I didn't want to tell. And so, but we've honestly had a great time. And the committee here has been so awesome. The volunteers is bar none. Honestly, the best that I've seen. As many people that step up for this thing, it's... And that's the truth. Robin, where's the chairperson, Robin? Where's she at? Stand up. So, she's a chairperson. She deserves that. When I showed up, she took me around and showed me every single room, everything that was going on here. Took me, I hadn't seen Lee for a while. Took me back to see, by the time I was done, I'm from Oregon, so I look like a raisin, because I'm sweating so much. But took the time to do that. I really appreciate, at the time I didn't even know she was the chairperson. So it's like to take the time to do that because I know how busy these things are. And to Russ for inviting me here and to, just stay on top of it. It's a lot of work. I always say the speakers get the most applause for the least amount of work, and you guys put this together. There's so much work behind the scene, and I appreciate that so much. And yeah. And the people here, you can go some places, and they're not as friendly. I'll tell you that right now. But I've had a great experience here, right from the get-go. I've mixed with people. I've got to sit with people, meet people out in the lobby. There's a guy here somewhere. He had 11 months. And, I love that. I love meeting the newcomer and just being able to interact with people. The tables we've had the last 2 nights for dinner are absolutely insane. There's one of them right there. You talk about Rule 62. I have not laughed harder in a long time. It's like, I love that. Laughter drug me to the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, or kept me in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. I believe it is the very best medicine that I've received since I've been in here. So, I'm getting to it. Candace, calm down. This is Candace, alcoholic. I didn't forget. My name is still Aaron. I'm an alcoholic. Thank you, Candace. My sobriety date, January 24th, 2007. I didn't forget that either. My home group is the Canby Saturday Breakfast Meeting. We meet at Los Dos Agaves in Canby, Oregon, 9 a.m., and I invite you all to breakfast, and I hope you take me up on that. And I had people come from the farthest is South Carolina so far to take me up on that, and I love it. Kansas City, and it's because I'm inviting you to my home. I have a sponsor who knows he's my sponsor. I have that's important. I hold an active service position in Alcoholics Anonymous. I first started service about 3 months in for my home group. It's the same home group I have now. I was a secretary. Some people call it the opener. And I was a nervous wreck. I didn't want to take it. But what it got me to do, if you're new, the service got me connected. I knew people's names. I shook people's hands. I set up the chairs. And it just pulled me into Alcoholics Anonymous, and it kept a seat there. So that's important to me. The 12 steps, if I get lost in my squirrel, if I get lost in my story, the 12 steps are extremely important to me. I don't want to get out of here without saying the big book is the meat and potatoes of Alcoholics Anonymous. I have a great time at these. We do rafting trips. I love meetings. All of that is the fellowship. But sitting down one-on-one with another alcoholic that has gone through the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous is vital. It's vital to my recovery, and it's vital to the people I've seen struggle in the room. So I don't want to leave that out of this story, but I'm going to tell you a little bit about how I grew up, what it was like, what happened, and what it's like now. I'm not a guy that can get up here. There's many people out here that can give great, talks on everyone. Peter here is, an absolute hero, for lack of a better word, a hero of mine. And I got the pleasure of meeting him this weekend, and I've heard just several talks, countless talks of Peter. That's the guy that I've listened to the most. And, at first I was telling him last night, I put that talk in, I'm like, this guy's driving me crazy, right? Like, you're working next to perfect programming. I can't stand this guy, right? I put in another talk and I'm like, he's still driving. I put in another one, and what was driving me nuts, it was the shortcomings personally of what I hadn't quite done in my program, where I was on a spiritual path. And I heard that through Peter's story. So the other night when he said blessing at the dinner, and I'm hearing that voice, I'm like, I have arrived. And so, and that's the importance of Lee in recording these things and having the history. And, please go out and support that, because we need that. All the way down from Bill W., you have this history of Alcoholics Anonymous. So, a little bit about how I grew up. I grew up in a small town in Oregon. These guys from Texas can probably relate. It was a logging community. I grew up way back in the hills. Everybody there did woodwork, working in the woods. And we're talking about the 200-foot trees, real hard work. My parents worked in the industry, both, I would say, functioning alcoholics. And drinking was all around me at that time. It was just part of the culture. It was the 70s. Olympia was the big beer. My grandpa was head of sales for Olympia Brewing, so we had Olympia everything. And So fast forward a little bit to where I started my drinking. I was about 15 years old. Although it was around, there was a lot of extracurricular activities going on too. A lot of them are legal in Oregon now. You can probably figure that out, what it is. 15 years old, I start drinking, and looking back on it from what I know now, I drank alcoholically from the very beginning. I drank, and I didn't want to stop to begin with, and it just lit a fire under me, and it opened up a world of action, chaos, all of that stuff. Like I said, small town, we'd go out, bonfires, fighting, the girls, it was the whole thing. And, I didn't want to stop. And it was early on in my high school, they had brought some counselors in, they do that with the county. And they realized way before I did that I had a problem. And, but I was having a good time, and, I went right into 17 years old. I went straight into logging, high lead logging, very dangerous work if you don't know about it. I know several people that I grew up with that have been killed in a tiny little town. Like I said, I graduated with 19 kids in my class. I was a kid and never got suspended from high school. I got along with everybody, liked to drink, but we did hard work and played harder. It was it's part of the culture in that type of work. And so not a lot of police officers where I grew up. In fact, there was absolutely none. When I graduated, I moved, and we lived in Outlaw. I always say this is the kind of town I grew up in. There was no hunting season. It was just all year long. If that'll give you a little idea, it was out in the woods. And move over to the next town, which was the big city of Philomath, and it was about 4,000 people. And right immediately, I say that my story is, it's like the third step. I made horrible decisions followed through with vigorous action, and that was the story of my life. And right off the bat, I just started getting in a lot of trouble, and the law doesn't make me an alcoholic. It just shows you where I am when I drink. 18 years old, I get my first DUI, and I'm introduced to the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I wish I could say I stayed, but I didn't. It was, introduced to the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. If you go to a small town meeting, there was about 10 people there. And I remember it to this day. I walk in and like Marty said, like the average age was dead. I love that. I remember the topic. The topic was serenity. I don't know why that stuck in my head because I had no idea what they were talking about. But this lady, she was so old, like she was like 45 years old. And like 45 years old. And she says, my idea of serenity is I just stay home at night and I pet my cat. And I'm like, whoa. We are in two different points in our life, right? And years later, I thought maybe she meant something else. I have no idea. So, maybe I should have stuck around the rooms a little bit longer, but I was out of there. Yeah, we just weren't on the same wavelength. And so from there, my drinking progressed. I was married and divorced by the age of 19. I had a son at the age of 19. I had no business being a father. I had no business being a husband. I was a horrible son. And I turned my back on that family, and I walked away for many years. And I'm not proud of that. I say if you look back at the pictures, I would show up for some photo ops. I might show up on a birthday or, maybe I'd show up on Christmas. But there was most times I didn't show up. Even when my dad would tell my son, hey, he's coming down, and I just wouldn't be there. And that's the story of my life. It just got worse and worse. I got into some, the conferences, we call them outside issues. Personally, I call them drugs. So I got into some stuff, and, it made it just extend, I'll just put it this way, it extended the weekends. And, I love that. The first time I did this stuff, my sponsor always said, and I related, my first demon was alcohol, and my last demon was alcohol. And in between, there was a whole lot of bad decisions, a whole lot of trouble, and a whole lot of other things. And but alcohol was consistent all the way through that. And that led me to a lot of jail time, in and out of the county jail, a lot of treatment centers. 24 years old, I'm in the second largest prison in Oregon. And in wondering, how did I get here? I had a sponsee of mine the other day, and he was sharing. He just got out of prison, and he says, the forecast was I was going to end up there, right? But when I ended up there, I was still puzzled on why I was there. Like, how did this happen? So right before then, it got serious. It got real dark, and I remember, shackled and chained when I go in. I'd just gotten out of, I had a prison sentence hanging over my head. And, I come into the courtroom, I'm shackled and chained to 4 other guys, and that's the way my dad said one of the most heartbreaking moments of his life. And he was in court, and he had asked my attorney if he could speak on my behalf. And at that point, my attorney was happy to let anybody speak on my behalf. So this is how it went. This is my son. He's becoming institutionalized. He's a danger to himself, and he's a danger to society. And please, whatever that suspended sentence is, give him the maximum amount that you can. And it's kind of funny now. It wasn't funny then. And, my probation officer was so disgusted with me. She worked right across the street, and she wouldn't even come. She phoned in to the hearing. And so then off I went. Prison, I won't get into that. I went through a boot camp program we had at the time, and it was, led by all military, 16 hours a day, 7 days a week. Cognitive restructuring, a lot of drug and alcohol. We did work, physical training, just like military. Request to speak, request to do this, 2-minute showers, and I excelled at that. I was like 24 out of 63 in my platoon that made it through. And because, if somebody can discipline me, keep me in a box, I do all right. You take away all the other stuff that I'm doing on the outside, I can be a decent person. And, I wanted that. And I come out of there and I was in good shape, cut a pretty good chunk off my sentence. And I lived down in Benton County. That was Corvallis at the time, OSU, for those of you that are college fans, and not a real big town. And so I asked my aunt, can I come up and stay with you in Portland? I want to get away from the drugs and alcohol. And sure, you've seen Portland on the news, right? So, not the smartest thing I've done. So, but I move up there. I go to college. I'm going into criminal justice. I just get out of prison. The book calls it delusional thinking. And 3.5 I was going to stay with my aunt for, she says 3 months. 3.5 years later, I'm still staying there. He started drinking again. My uncle was pretty much a legendary musician around Portland. He just passed away recently. But so it wasn't like they were leading this, Ozzy and Harriet life, It's like once I started drinking, that was okay. I started sneaking out, doing some other stuff. And my aunt was like my second mom. She put up with a lot of stuff. But when it came down to it, she said, Aaron, she goes, I think we've done all we can here for you, and you're going to have to move on. I'm flunking out of school. I don't have a job. And, so I moved out. I moved in with a friend. And, it's getting darker at this point. The fun, I say, runs less and less and less the longer you go. And here I am, my aunt, my uncle, I loved them, and they're basically, this is it. And so I was having trouble finding some work. I have a criminal background. And so I had a buddy, he was a union guy, and he says, yeah, come on out here. Mark no on the application that you have a criminal background, and he goes, it's very lax. So, we'll get, and sure enough, I got a job there. I'm working with Teamsters, and few of them drink. Right across the street, we have, 3 bars. You know the story, and I'm not going to get into it, but it's like I work swing shift. I go to work at 4 in the afternoon. I get off at 12:30. In Oregon, the bars close at 2:30. We go over there, we close them down. We have one bar that will serve us right up until 2:20, right? And we just stack the table with pitchers, right? And they let us sit in there and finish them up. And so it just progressed to the point, I missed a ton of work. I'm not going to get into, all you. I think I was suspended for 21 times at the end of that job for attendance, and it was just this floating, it was a point system, so I get some points back, go back, And so that was the first time I reached out for help. It was probably 2001, and I went to the general manager, and I said, hey, and I just laid everything down. Every time I'd been written up, every time, and the union holds on to these guys, and every attendance mark, I said, is due to alcohol. And so they let me do an outpatient thing there. Life starts getting better. I start hitting some meetings and get some self-knowledge, going to some 12-step here, 12-step there, and it works good for you guys. And I sit in the back and I scoot out the door. And I don't want to become committed. In the back of my head, I thought, how many people had I let down in my life? And I don't want to let these people down until I know I'm 100% committed. That was the difference when I came in here the last time. I jumped in, right? Because I had to save my life. I wasn't working to save my life at that time. And started putting together some months of sobriety. I worked in a distribution center with 300 guys. There was like 5 women in there. So if they look better than Adam over here, they were good looking, right? It was like working in a prison. And but this one beautiful woman came in, and I always say, she angelic. She had the long blonde hair, the pale skin, and she ended up asking me out. And I'm sober at this point. She doesn't drink, she doesn't do anything else, and very just a good soul. Why she was attracted to me, I have no idea. But I was sober at the time. And her dad worked at the other end. His name was Martin, and he looked like a bulldog at this point. He worked a different shift. I didn't know him. He'd put out a little, to all the guys on his crew, like a father. He was a very protective father. Nobody's going to date my daughter. On his shift, I didn't get the memo down on swing shift. So, I was on the list right off the bat. The guy, he just did not like me. I mean, I'd surpassed that graveyard crew, and he just wanted to kill me. And it took him months before he would even meet me. And he was a very protective dad, salt of the earth, small town guy, and always looked angry. And yeah, he wouldn't meet me. He just didn't. And so his wife finally told, Martin, this is a losing battle. Megan is obviously in love with this guy, and you don't want to lose her, So I finally got invited over to his house for dinner, and he had heard about my past, and he'd done a little research. Although I'm sober at this time, it was a very silent dinner, and we were going to go to the movies, and I remember her, Dad, if you want to talk to Aaron, you're going to have to do it. And I went and I sat in the other room, and he just looked at me, and he said, these are the 3 things that I do not like about you. And it was all downhill from there. And he wrapped up the conversation, my brother does, he wrapped up the conversation with, this is my baby girl, and if you ever hurt her or any one of my kids, I have no problem going to prison for them. And I'm like, he meant it. I knew he meant it. So that was a great relationship we started out, and I was sober. So from there I kind of progressed, and it took me some months. And I went out, and long story short, I went to visit a friend in South Dakota, where my mom's family was from, and I decided to take a drink. I contemplated that drink for a long time. Once the obsession takes over, I'm going to drink. It's just that simple. And I contemplated, doesn't matter if it's 2 minutes, 20 minutes, 2 days, I'm going to drink. And I did, and it was instant blackout, right off the bat. And I came back, and I told Megan, I said, if I drink, I have a problem, and you're going to have to leave me, right? And it was, I was honest. And what happened was she didn't leave. And what does that do for an alcoholic like me? That just opens the door for the next time. I know she's not going to take off. I'm safe. And there's the next time. And the first woman, and God bless Alan. You had a great talk yesterday, Lori. It's like, she was the first person in my life that went to Al-Anon, that tried to stay with me, that loved me unconditionally, and wanted me to do well, that reconnected me with my son, and she made it a safe home for him to come up and to stay with us. She said, don't you want to have this relationship with my son? And I did. I didn't know how. And then he'd come up, and sometimes I'd be sober, and sometimes I wouldn't. And sometimes I set an all right example, and sometimes I set the worst. But she was always a solid. My dad always said, I feel safe when my son is with you, and she just had that presence, that calm. Like I said, always said that, she was like an angel to me. She stuck with me through thick and thin. And we ended up, one of the times that I got sober for a period of time, one thing I did was I made a decent wedding proposal, and she accepted. Her dad had to accept as well that this was going to happen. And that was September 17th of 2006. And that was probably, as far as being spiritually sick, I'd done the jail, I'd done the prison, and that year it got so dark. I remember her dad just said, you better stay upright at this wedding. That's all he wanted me to do, is stay. I did. But by the end of that year, I was just done. It was to the point where I would literally lay in bed, and there was times I just couldn't get up to go to work or function, and I would beg my wife to go get me alcohol, to go get me booze, please. Sometimes she would, sometimes she'd just get up and get even enough, so maybe I can get some more, maybe I can make it to work. Most of the time, and I'm just dying inside. And I say at the end of my drinking, I love my brother said one time, and it always stuck with me, I drank to be free. And by drinking, I created my own prison in the end. And, at the end, that house with the shades drawn and drinking, it was like darker than any cell that I've ever sat in, And so January 1st, I write a New Year's resolution, like we do. And at the very top of it was do not drink. And under that was be a better father, be a better son, be a better brother. All I wanted to do was be a better man. And I knew at these points of sobriety I could be a decent human being. And I just, I knew all that felt, but I was like, I tried AA, I'm still going on, I always say, I'm all powerful. When I was ready to quit, when the consequences got too bad, which was like years before, wasn't in my vocabulary, but if I quit having a good time, I was going to quit. In the last 5 years, alcohol had its hooks in me so bad that I just couldn't, and I don't know, it talks about it in the big book, all the things we try. I tried them all, everything, drink whiskey because it wakes me up. I'm not going to fall and need this other thing, and I'll drink on the week, I'm not going to go into it, but it's I tried every experiment I could. So that was January 1st, 2007. I'm on self-will. I can do this once again. You give me a lie detector test, I'm never going to drink again. January 5th, I get a DUI with my 16-year-old son in the car, downtown Portland. 2 blocks from where I took off. That tells you what kind of person he is. Kind of tells you what I do, It's like, we're ripping out of this concert, and 2 blocks later, I get pulled over by a cop that already had somebody pulled over. And, so it was like, wow, this guy's a much better catch. Woo! Motorcycle cop. So this is going to be a little more fun. So I had my son in the car. They take him off in one police car. They take me in another, and he's sobbing. And he's crying. And my brother-in-law is a Portland police officer. He happens to work at the precinct that they take me to. And I'm like, say hi to Joe down there. And one of the cops came back. He said, that's your brother. He said, you're his brother-in-law. You have a serious drinking problem, and you need help. And from there, incomprehensible demoralization, right? And that lasted 2 weeks. And I'm driving by a store on the way home from work. In Oregon, I don't know why they give you 30 more days to drive after you get a DUI, hoping you get another one. I don't know why they do that. And then I'm driving by a store. Like I said, you give me a lie detector test. Once again, incomprehensible demoralization. I'm going to pass it. I'm going to pass it on that drive. When I start up that vehicle on the way home, if you ask me, are you going to drink tonight? I'm going to tell you no. And my car is automatically just pulls in there for what? 1 beer. 1 beer. 20 years of drinking, debauchery, falling on my face, and I still think I can have that 1 beer, all right? And it ignites the craving. And I'm in and out of the blackout for the next 5 days. And I'm picking up my son from school, and there's cops on the premises. And I remember him, Dad, how much have you had to drink? And my wife's parents, at this point, Martin wants to come over and do the right thing by his daughter. And they try to, I'm missing work, and they feed me. And they make me coffee, and I'm going back to go to the bathroom. I'm taking pulls off the whiskey from the night before. And I can't wait for them to leave. And they're trying to get me, you got to get up there, you're going to get fired, you got to do this, you got to, you got a wife and a kid here. And I wouldn't do it. I just can't get even enough to get out and do what's right. Now, what do? I promise. I'll go to a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous when you guys leave. And I remember to this day, and I'm sure a lot of you have seen it. I remember, and I'm looking out the blinds, and Megan's staying at their house at this point. She doesn't even want to come over and face me. And I remember her dad just had his head hung down, like he couldn't do the right thing by his daughter, no matter what he did, And she wanted him to come over. She's like, just go over there and punch him in the face. That's what she said to him. She's the sweetest girl on planet Earth, right? He's over there and he's trying to do the right thing. And I remember her mom turned back and she looked at the house. She doesn't know I'm looking at it, with this look of disgust that I'll never forget. And I couldn't wait for them to get out of there fast enough so I can go down and get more booze. Sure, you guys can relate to that. For whatever reason, January 23rd, a couple days later, I'm just drinking myself into a darkness, and I call up Megan. I said, "Can you please come home? I need to talk to you." And she did, and I have no idea why. And I said, we need to talk about my drinking and my problem. And for the first time in my heart, it was like I was defeated. And I'm trying to get her to drink with me, She's not a drinker, I got some beers left. Let's sit down and talk about my drinking problem. We got to get on the same page here. And she's having no part of it. So but I lost it. And I knew at that moment, for whatever reason, that I was done. It was the surrender to win, right? And I left her a note, and I'm like, I love you, and I am sorry for what I've done to you and your family. And please, the codependent, the Al-Anon in me is, please stay home with me today, and I'll go to some meetings with you. And at this point, she's like, whatever. So she gets a productive member of society and goes to work. And here's what, apologize for saying what, but I have to build the most important part of my story. And right here, I would like, is there any, the people, not to embarrass you, but who has less in a room, or less than a year in this room tonight? That's beautiful. I want to welcome you to Alcoholics Anonymous from the bottom of my heart. And, I stand up here, and my story is for you guys. These guys down here in the front row, I'm pretty sure they got it figured out. They keep doing what they're doing. They're going to get another day, right? You guys might be on the borderline out there. And my story is for you to give you hope. And, I hope you guys come up and talk to me some point at the rest of the conference and, get a little bit more of this, and I can, we can talk. Because what happened for me is I drove 10 miles to the nearest meeting that worked with my shift, and it was a new meeting, and I think I talked about it a little bit yesterday, and I walked up these old steps into the Buena Vista house, and it was just a shack on the edge of a park, and I walked in there, and my life changed. Somebody, and that can be a sick meeting, it can be a check-in meeting, and for whatever reason that day, the lady read, and I still don't know who this was, but what about the real alcoholic? Here's the guy that's been puzzling. I'll paraphrase. I'm not good. He builds his life down. He builds his life up, and he tears it down. A real Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. He's more or less insanely drunk, right? He uses high-powered sedatives that weren't mine in order to get to work, right? And I'm like, but it clicked, man. And she was reading to me. And that got me to buy 2 books that day. I'm sure I'd had one from a treatment center. And I go up and I buy 2 books. Because on the way home, I pass literally directly by her parents' house. And I go in and I apologize to her mom, and I hand her a big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. I am so sorry for what I've been doing. Please read this, and it might explain my problem. I hadn't even cracked the cover of my own. And so I get home. Luckily, I didn't know what page number that was on, and I start digging through the book, and I start reading it, right? And just like most of you, I'm on every single page. And that meeting gave me hope. There was a light in there. I always say the shades were open, the lights were on, the sun was out, and I had been drinking in such a dark place. This is Oregon. January is very hard to get a day where the sun's out. And I remember that meeting, I look out the window, and I'm like, it's the first time I feel like I've seen sunlight in years. And so I keep going back to that meeting, and every day they ask, is there anybody here in their first 30 days of sobriety? And I'd raise my hand and say, my name's Aaron, I'm an alcoholic. And I became accountable to that group. But in my head, it's all about me. I thought they thought I was drinking every night. I'm like, this is the longest 30 days of my life. I'm still Aaron, I'm an alcoholic. I just want to go, disclaimer, I didn't drink last night, but 30 days. And from there, I'm digging through I'm loving Alcoholics Anonymous. There was a big guy in there by the name of Steve Little, and he talked about fighting in the logging bridge he used to go under, and, busting it up with cops and stealing Mad Dog 2020. And I'm like, God, that was the first, and he had a magnetism, right? Like a lot of people in this room, like Adam had for me. He had a magnetism that drew people to him, and he had 20 years of sobriety at that time, and I thought, if he can do this, right, and I related to him, and that's the kind of guys that I drew to, that were like me. So I'm looking through the meeting schedule, and I find a meeting that can be Saturday breakfast meeting, and I thought, these guys can all afford breakfast, so they must be doing better than me at this time. And that's how I thought about it. They've been working this program. They can pay for a breakfast, and that's what I was looking for is this solid sobriety. And I'd heard about it in the noon meeting. And I walked in there, and I remember Steve, his deal was, he had gone back out when he was younger, and he had spent a little bit of time in Alcoholics Anonymous. And he went out for about 3 months, and he came back in, and this old timer grabbed him, and he said, hey, Steve, how you doing? I haven't seen you in a while. And he's Steve's a big guy. And he just turned around and he started crying, and this other guy came up and he said, what's going on? He said, that guy remembered my name. He said, how did that make you feel? He said, it made me feel good, right? And he said, that's your job now. You remember everybody's name when they come in the door. And Steve did that. Before the cell phones, before all that, he would remember your name. It was like, I have no idea names and birthdays, and it was a gift for him, and so he did that. So I walk into that meeting. There's two guys sitting at the end of the table. We had it in a bar. It was the Canby Pub and Grill at that point. I walked through the bar, and I'm looking for and it was in a back room, and then sitting there was Steve Little and my current sponsor. Wasn't my sponsor at that time. Hot Rod Dave, they call him, and they're like two Muppets. They turned into like two Muppets at the end of the table during my sobriety. And, hey, Aaron, how's it going? It's good to see you. And I'm like, I didn't know that he remembered my name. I'm a part of this. And what that meeting was, and it was like what I've experienced down here. The more people, at that time it was about 40 or 50 people, and it was electric, right? You walk in there and the laughter, like we were doing the other night, was just explosive. And they talked about climbing mountains together and going on cruises and scuba diving and going to sporting events and concerts. And, you just hear these conversations, this buzz. And they talk about the 12 steps, and then but I realized from what I knew about the 12 steps to this point that these people had somehow implemented it into their lives. And that was the attraction to this meeting. And I started going. My hurdle was God. My mom, I used to say I didn't have God in my household. But I reflect back, my dad was, he's got a PhD, very intelligent, total atheist. He's read the Bible cover to cover twice. My mom grew up Seventh-day Adventist, but my dad was that guy that wouldn't even allow her to have a picture of Jesus on the wall. So we go back to my grandparents, and so my idea of God, the only one I had, was sitting in Seventh-day Adventist church. And anybody out there that knows Seventh-day, at least, it was very boring back in the Midwest. When I go to South Dakota, like Rapid City, it was a small town. I'm just like, oh my. So that was my idea of God. And so when I came into Alcoholics Anonymous, I was like, that was the only concept I have. But I'm like, I didn't think I believed in that. So I was pretty much an open book. And but willing. Honest, open, and willing. I was just so beat up at that point. It was like, these guys talk about this 12 step. I've heard about them for years. I'm reading through them, and, I go back when I reflect on the steps, I heard Joe and Charlie say it a long time ago. It was, I didn't have to do much work on my first step. I worked on that for 20 years. There was no doubt my life was unmanageable, right? There was no doubt I didn't have control. When I walked in that meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous and took that breath of fresh air, for me, I completed step 1. The came to believe. Step 2, I was just honest enough to listen, right? And it gives you that. It talks about it in the 12 and 12, that little piece of willingness, the little crack in the window or the door, I'm not, and that's what I had. I'm willing to listen. I'm willing to give this a shot. And I think Cliff and Lori know this guy. There was a guy 3 weeks in, and he was sharing in my home group, still a home group member to this day. And his name's Ron, and I always share this with his permission. And he was celebrating a birthday. And he told a little bit of his story. And what Ron's story was, he was in a drunk driving crash in the late 80s, and he killed a mother and her 2 children. And the most humble man. And he talked about a letter of forgiveness, which is one of the most powerful things I've ever heard from the victim's family, from the mother of the mother that he had killed. That's because of the work that he had done in Alcoholics Anonymous. And he carried that message as a human. I didn't listen to what he had to say, and there was no patting myself on the back. There was no putting myself on a pedestal. It was like, this is what I got out of the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. And it kicked the door wide open to a power greater than myself. He talked about a guy that brought in the meeting. He had some sobriety. He was in the Mill Creek group of Alcoholics Anonymous in OSP. And a guy, he had sobriety, but a guy brought in, by the name of Chicago John, brought in a meeting from the outside, and God bless anybody that does H&I. I wasn't in that prison, but because of a direct result of the H&I, I'm here, and I get to do this, and I'm alive. And he told Ron, he pulled him aside after the meeting, he said, Ron, he goes, you can't unring the bell, but you never have to ring it again. And Ron said, because of that man, he had a sobriety date. And, like I said, blew the doors wide open, blew the windows out, and I'm introduced to a power greater than myself. And I go home and I dig through that big book one more time, and I'm like, I don't know how to pray. And I'm just digging through there, and I know I've seen some stuff in there. Simple prayer. thy will, not mine, be done. From what I've heard here in the last several days up to this point, for whatever reason, I listened, like I said yesterday, everybody's my teacher. And somewhere along the line, I heard, the prayers work better when you hit your knees. And every night, that was all I knew how to pray. It was, thy will, not mine, be done. And I remember that day was February 17th is when I heard that. I just on the reflection of what had happened. So I'm waiting at that point. My 29th day, and nothing against the plastic coins or chips or whatever, the breakfast meeting had given me a 24-hour as well, and it was the nice bronze, the heavy metal, we call them out there. And 29 days, and I'm rolling over because I work swing shift, and I've got that coin in my pocket, and I find this huge warehouse, and I find a spot in a corner where nobody was, and I pull that coin out, and I know some people look down on these coins, and I think it's a farce, but I held on to a prayer in that moment and reflected on everything I'd heard. Like I said, if you're new, it is so imperative I get this across. This is 30 days, 29 days into my 30th, and I'm like, how good I felt. How I felt like there was this God in my life. How I felt these people had stepped up and this fellowship, and it just all the stars that had lined, and I was so grateful, And what happened is I went home that night, and it was about 2 a.m, and I opened the door to my bedroom, and Megan was laying a little bit different than she was before, and she wasn't breathing, and God, somebody get a hold of my brother. She wasn't breathing, and I call up 911. Never had to do it in my life. Never had to do it before. Never had to do it since. And they're telling me work on her. You get her on the floor, and I'm doing the CPR. And they said, "Is there anybody that we can call?" And I said, "Call her dad." And I gave them the phone number. They said, "Just keep working on him." And I live in a small town, and the paramedics are probably 5 minutes away, and it feels like it takes them 2 hours. And they show up, and they go into the room, and they work on it, and that part felt like about 30 seconds, 2 minutes. And they came out, and they said, "Sir, can we see you in the other room?" And I knew right then she was gone. And her dad came through the door. I tried to grab him. I said, "Martin, she didn't make it." God. The paramedics grabbed him, and he tried to go back to the room, and he hit the floor. He just collapsed. And I heard the sound of a father's heartbreak that night. And I never want to hear that again. And from there, we had to go tell her twin sister, her best friend from day one, and we had to tell her mom. I remember coming back, and anybody that's been through that knows there's police officers in the room. They have the clergy, they have the paramedics, and they want to make sure that it's, no foul play, anything like that. And, I reflect on this sometime, and the medical examiner came out, and he said, I see there's some recovery books back there, and I had my big book and the 12 and 12 on the stand, and he said, "Were those hers?" And I didn't. I'm like, "No, those are mine." And I reflect now, it's because we lose so many people to suicide that reach that jumping off place, and that's what he was saying. So I knew God and Alcoholics Anonymous, when I reflect on it, were right there, and for whatever reason, I asked that man to say the Lord's Prayer in the middle of my living room, and I don't know where that came from. And the next day, the family's in shock, and I don't go to that noon meeting. I don't collect my 30-day coin, and I'm sure you guys can understand that. The day after that, I'm laying on my living room floor because I can't go back to the bedroom, and I couldn't do that for several months. And every time I even announce a doubt, if there's a power greater than myself, I think of this day. And sleeping on the living room. I'm not sleeping. I couldn't sleep. And the door opens. And if I would have had it locked, anything, different time, this would be a different story. And it was Megan's dad, and he says, this is the last thing I promised my daughter, was to get you to a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous, and you're going to get up and you're going to go. And what I didn't know is the night before she passed away, she had called her dad and said, Dad, I have to work on Saturday. I'm going to work some overtime. Can you get Aaron to this meeting? She had I have no doubt that God set that up, right? And he took me to that meeting, and he said that same thing. I stood up and I said, this is it. And we sobbed and sobbed and sobbed. And that whole meeting cried with us. And I said, that's my wife. I deserve to be there 100 times before she was. I deserve. And he said, I'm fulfilling one last promise to my daughter. And I got up that morning, and they gave me my 30-day coin, the heavy metal. And I hugged my buddy Gary, who I didn't know from Adam at that point, one of my closest friends to this day. And they hug me and they say, keep coming back. And Steve Little stands up and he said, this is Alcoholics Anonymous. When one of us hurts, we all hurt. And that, God, it hit me in the heart, And we had to plan a memorial, And Megan was 24 years old. People ask me this, she had epilepsy. She only had about 5 seizures in her entire life. And they always said they weren't life-threatening. They were always in her sleep. And they always said, just let it go, if you see it. But I wasn't there. And we'll get her medications, redone. And so that's what happened to her. And we had to go through the memorial. If there's any music is where I connect with my spirituality. It's like a never-ending love song. And when I had picked our song to dance to just 5 months before, it was Walk the Line by Johnny Cash. And it was by Travis Tritt, and Johnny Cash once said it was the most beautiful version he had ever heard. And my uncle, the one I was talking about, was willing to play whatever song I wanted. And I stood up and I turned around, and the place was just full of people. And Megan had an impact. She was one of those people that just had a magnetic, just that person. And I said, this is the first and last song I ever danced to my wife with. And it's a promise, and it's a dedication. Let's walk the line. And you guys know the story. And I've been able to keep that promise one day at a time for the last 16 years, not on my own, but because of God and because of you. That man, Martin, drove me to that breakfast meeting every Saturday for the next 3 years. This wasn't my guy. He'll tell people to you this day, he hated me. He will. He loves telling people in Alcoholics Anonymous that. And he made an amends to me at one point. He said, I'm sorry, Aaron. I thought you were, I won't go into what he said. But he said, I saw this was working for you week after week. And I knew how important it was to Megan that you stay sober. So I kept taking you. And we healed through you guys. You spoke to us. The God with skin on it. And me and that man made a bond like no other. And he says to this day, he calls me his son. That's Alcoholics Anonymous. You gave me that, right? I don't deserve that. It's by the grace of God. And he would share. My mom said one time, I said, does Martin, I had about 2 years sober, and I was talking to my mom. She was in a care facility. I said, she goes, does Martin ever share in those meetings? I said, yeah, he calls himself the honorary alcoholic. And as those words, I don't know if you've ever feel like you've been punched in the heart by God, where it's just like, bah, and instant tears. Because in my heart, what he had been saying that whole time was he'd be honored to be one of us. And that man was so salt of the earth, and you guys let him share. You guys let him heal. He was a family member of Alcoholics Anonymous. My buddy Tim always says, Martin is a promoter of Alcoholics Anonymous now. He's not part of it, but he will promote this. He says, you know why? Because he had a front row seat to what Alcoholics Anonymous could do. And, we healed through that. And he would say just simple stuff. From some people it would be corny, but he'd say, I might not drive the best car, and I might not have the nicest house, but I'm one of the richest men I know because I have a family that loves me. And that's how I feel about Alcoholics Anonymous. You've made me one of the richest men I know because you love me. And I can never repay that. I repay it one day at a time. I work with whoever I can. I welcome you. And what Alcoholics Anonymous has done for me is, I think Gary Kay out of Texas, he hit me one time. He said, only you will know if you're doing this to the best of your ability. Only you can lie to me all you want, but you sitting in that seat will only know if you're giving this thing 100%. And I hope by the time I leave that porch, by the time I get on the plane, when I step off in Oregon, that I'm the same man that I am standing up here today. And I've got a good shot of that because you guys have taught me how to live, and that's the way it is. To get into my was that enough of what it was like? Or what happened? Dick Relief told me one time, he said, you stayed drunk too long. I said, that's funny, my family said the same thing. But that's what happened, and from there my life has become so rich and so plentiful. It's hard to put into word, and I could stand up here, I joke about talking for 3.5 hours when I get wound up on Alcoholics Anonymous because I have a great love for it. It's done huge things for my family. It has expanded. The best thing it has done is it has given me the trust of my family back, the ability to connect with them. And I have countless friends, and we get to do great things together. We used to talk about, I'd listen to those guys. We get to travel the world. I get to be here with my brother, on the East Coast. And, it's Alcoholics Anonymous. I will never quit being grateful when I'm doing this stuff that I'm like, this is not, Peter said, for fun and for free. I get to do this. You know what I mean? I'll never quit being grateful when I sit down here and go, this isn't work. I just am so grateful to be able to do it. And that's all Alcoholics Anonymous. I've stood at the top of Mount Hood, for those of you that are familiar with Oregon, 11,300 feet. You got over 2 miles, and I trudged to the top of that thing. And I took God with me. And I get to the top of that, and I like to say, I can't see the wind, but I know it's there. And even when I'm in a room like this, I know, especially when I'm in a room like this, I can't see God. I see you guys, and I know He's there. And I'm on the top of that, and that wind's blowing like crazy. And from there, I can see the desert on the other side of Mount Hood. You can see out to the ocean and the beauty of Oregon. And I can't doubt for a second what God has created there, right? And that's where I connect. The music, the spirituality, the never-ending love song. And I take a pocket of Megan's ashes, and I scoop it into the snow. I throw it to the wind. And I thank God and Alcoholics Anonymous for being able to do that as close to heaven as I could get. And I owe you guys that. From the places I've got to be, from Mexico to Canada, to eat lobster off the boat in Nova Scotia, and stand on Wrigley Field with my uncle. And my goal was, we were talking about the Grand Canyon, to stick my toes over to the edge of the Grand Canyon and to put my toes in the Atlantic Ocean. And the places God has taken me, I'll be forever grateful. But it's what you've given me in my heart, what you've given me in my family, that I can't repay. My son and I have a beautiful relationship. I've been there for the birth of my grandkids. I was just down there last weekend with them. And my family, I have one blood brother. Some of you have met him here. And August 1st, 2010, he gives me a call, and he says, my wife's really screwed up. she's stealing all my pills. She's drinking too much, and I've been waiting for this call. And I'm like, he's like, can you help me get her to a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous? And I'm like, and I'm so grateful I got the call, and I'm so grateful I pick up the phone and I go, the 12 and 12 Club in Portland, and it's old school Alcoholics Anonymous. And I said, take her down there, and they give the non-alcoholic how it works. And this is why I don't mess with the readings. And somebody was talking about it yesterday, how that becomes just noise at some point. You know, we forget the power that are in those pages. And I don't like the, in all our affairs, woo, you know, like, pay attention to that. Because it could save some, might be the first time somebody's heard that. When he reads that, he makes it halfway through, God kicks him in the heart, and he loses it. Him and his wife have both been here since August 1st, 2010. And they're active in Alcoholics Anonymous, and I'm so blessed. This is the first convention I've got to go with my little brother, and we like last night. I'm like, I got to get some sleep. I got to talk in the morning. We're like, wow, John, breaking down the talks we had heard. I'm like, literally, I'm like, it's 2 a.m, right? And I'm like, I get into bed, and I'm like trying to unplug, and I can't. Like, I'm on fire from you guys. You know, this has been the greatest convention, you know, that I mean, and I mean that from the bottom of my heart. The people here, I just feel so at home. And the electricity, right? Even from the voice, right? The voice comes up here and he starts out, you know, I've been someplace like, peace, please, at the tribe, yeah. The voice up here just kicks it off, you know, and I'm like, I feel that energy. I feel that love. I feel the electricity, and that's what keeps me coming back to Alcoholics Anonymous. You know, through COVID, I was able to, we set up a big book study on the back of one of my friend's porch. Starts out with like 2 or 3 guys. We got it to like 12 or 15. We kept working this thing through COVID. You know, I will not stop on Alcoholics Anonymous. I got a service position during that time. I don't do the thing. I don't like to be the center of attention. I like to get there early. That's my service position. I set up the chairs before anybody gets there, you know, make the coffee, and be a part of, you know, people in my home group. I'm sure you get, you know, hey, the big child in Alcoholics Anonymous, you know. But I try always to remember that God gave me this, and everything that I owe to God. I owe to you because He spoke through you, you know. I want to close. You always hear, and I always heard this in Alcoholics Anonymous, to be there for your parents at the end. You know, my mom said when I was in prison, she would cry the blue out of her eyes, and every night she worried about me. And I didn't care. You know, I was living my life, I did not care. And she cried herself to sleep many, many nights. So when she was in the care facility, we had her, she lived close to me. An hour, you know, not an hour, it was like 10 minutes away, you know, a mile away, and I walk over there a lot of the time, and I spent a lot of time with my mom. And one of the biggest gifts, what I learned in here, is the laughter, right? The laughter. And I'd go in there, and I'd crack jokes with my mom, and I'd make her just the belly laugh, right? That was a gift. And that was my amends, you know, to spend that time with her, and I got to do that. So towards the end, you know, when it was getting to the point where she, you know, we got 5 really good years where she was super clear, and towards the end, she had multiple sclerosis. And so when it turns on you, it can turn on you pretty quick. And so it got to the point where it was getting, where the communication was getting less and less. And my brother came up, thank God, to Alcoholics Anonymous, and we got to spend some great times with her. And my brother was talking about it last night. You know, she was in a room off by herself, and he breaks down on me last night. And he's like, I just went up and I told her, I said, we're okay. You know, we're going to be okay. Your sons are where they need to be. And he goes, because I knew that was important to her, you know, and I got to go in there every night, and he spent some time. And, you know, when God walks you out of a place, and I remember him saying goodbye because he had to go back to California. And he said, and I knew he walked out of there strong. And as soon as we hit the door, you know, God walked him out of there, and he just broke. And next week, it got to the point where she would only communicate. I would walk in the room and she would smile, right? I'd say, "Hey, Mom, it's me." And she would smile. She had a smile that would light up the room, and she couldn't talk to me. We'd listen to music. We'd listen to Willie Nelson. We'd listen to Johnny Cash, and I'd just sit there and I'd read to her, and just so she could hear my voice. And so it got to the end. My point here is Chuck Chamberlain said one time in New Pair of Glasses, I read that, and the part that jumped out to me was that God is love, right? God is love. And so I rolled this through my head, and my mom grew up on the plains of South Dakota, and we kind of had that both spiritually. She was a believer, she was a believer. And so I'd been reading her this book. I'll call him Willie N. These guys from Texas probably know who he is. And because it was the last thing that I read my mother. And it is... it defined God to me, and for whatever reason, I'd been reading this through this book, and the guys, it can be a joker and a very well written, and it said God is a 4-letter word, and I read all around this, and for whatever reason, that last night, I flipped to that page, and I read it, and it says, no matter your religion, you likely have your own idea of what God is. Some think of God as that big guy in the sky who makes all the decisions for us. Some say God is a woman. Some say God is dead. Some say God never was. My view is simple. I believe that God is love, period. End of story. For love runs through everyone and everything. Every one of us loves the flowers, and the flowers love the rain. If you love the ocean, you know the ocean lives and loves to caress the shore. Love is a thing we all have in common. We ache for love. We hope for love. We love and like to be loved. And that's God. Take these words of wisdom everywhere you go. Tell all the religions of the world, and through them the truth shall flow. But God is love, and love is God. And that's all you need to know. And then it goes on to the next, and he writes a letter to God. And it says... the universe in which we're born is infinitely large, and each of us is so small. We search for meaning when the meaning is all around us. In every moment of our day, we search for you. God, we always have. We try to give you a form that you can understand. You've always been with me in all of your many forms. I started in a Methodist church, but found myself at ease with every religion I've tried to understand. We were put here for a reason, and that by doing our best, we may find the light we seek. If not, our souls are eternal, and perhaps next time around, we'll do better. He spoke to me in the church, and he spoke to me in the fields and in the open pastures. He spoke to me in the songs of the mockingbirds and the blue jays who flew above us. He spoke to me through the rustle of the Texas wind and the trees, through the thunder in the night. And when I paused to listen, you still speak to me. He spoke to me through the music and the guidance from my mother, who told me God always prevails because good and goodness can never be defeated. I wrote a song for you once called In God's Eyes, but maybe I wrote all of those songs for you, just as these songs were gifts from you. You were with me at the birth of my children and the passing of my friends. You were with me when I gaze out on the blue bonnets of Texas. You're with me when the rooster crows at dawn. He doesn't sound sweeter than a mockingbird, but try telling the rooster that. I feel you when I marvel and wonder at the brilliant rainbows of Maui, when I sing in the little frontier chapel in Luck, and when I stop for reflection on a quiet weekday in the Methodist church where my sister and I first lifted our voices to the heavens. The beauty of this world and the people in it have always been with us. You give us the power to see, smell, and touch it. We're born of love, and it is love that carries us through. And those are the last words that I spoke to my mother before kissing her on the head, telling her I loved her and I'd be back the next day. And she passed that night. And I know she passed that night knowing that I knew God, and that was my God. And you guys gave me that. And, you speak through me. Lori spoke to me yesterday when she talked about, for once, when Cliff told her, this is it, I'm going to see my sponsor. I heard my wife. I heard Megan speak through you, because you said, for once, I believed him. And I watched Cliff watch you with that love in his heart and I felt like Megan was watching me. That's the love that I saw, and I thank you guys for that. I cannot thank this program enough. I cannot thank God enough. It's been a blessing to be here, an extreme blessing, to meet some of my heroes, to speak with some of my heroes. I've met a lot of you. Thank you for teaching me. Thank you for keeping me in Alcoholics Anonymous. And thank you for turning me into a recovered alcoholic. With that, I'll wrap it up, and thank you, and have a great morning.